Imagine you are standing in a very familiar space, a Sunday morning. Soft light filters through stained glass windows, casting gentle colors across the church floor. The atmosphere is quiet, almost sacred. You hear the soft shifting of chairs, someone clearing their throat, the rustle of turning pages, and then the service reaches its final moments. The pastor bows his head. The whole room seems to slow down, and he begins. Our Father who art in heaven. You've heard this line hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times. It's so familiar that it almost becomes automatic. But then, something happens, a very small moment, very quick, yet impossible to ignore. You glance at the person next to you. It could be your mother, it could be your grandmother, or an elderly woman who has been going to church longer than you can remember. Her eyes are closed, not casually closed, but with deep focus. Her lips move gently, not clearly audible, but each word seems deeply engraved in her soul. No effort needed, no thinking required. And what draws your attention is not what she is saying, but her face. A very unusual kind of peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything in life being fine, but something deeper, a kind of trust, a kind of reverence, something you can feel, but cannot explain. And then you turn back to yourself. You begin to recite as well. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your mouth speaks, but your mind begins to slow down, because somewhere within these familiar words, something no longer feels quite right. A small question, very small, but enough to make you pause. Do I truly understand what I am saying, or am I just repeating it, like an old song you know by heart, but have never truly listened to? You continue, thy kingdom come, but then you hesitate. Which kingdom? Where? When? Thy will be done. Which will? In what situation? Give us this day our daily bread. Is it just food? Or is there something more? Forgive us our debts. You pause a little longer, as we also forgive. So what if I haven't forgiven? Is that a condition? Lead us not into temptation. Another question rises. Does God lead people into temptation, or have I misunderstood something? And then, Amen. Everyone lifts their heads. The sounds return. Chairs move. Soft conversations begin. The rhythm of normal life resumes. But you remain there, with a very strange feeling. Not doubt, but a realization that maybe, just maybe, you've been saying these words for years without ever truly understanding them. And if you're feeling that, if you've ever had a moment like this, listen carefully. You are not alone. You are not lacking faith. You are not the problem. In fact, you are beginning to do something very few people dare to do. You are beginning to think. Because the truth is, many people can recite a prayer by heart, but very few ever stop to ask, what does it really mean? And that very question, it is not a lack of reverence, but the first step of a real faith. Because a faith that never asks questions will never go deeper, and a faith that never goes deeper will always remain on the surface, like a beautiful heirloom, carefully cleaned, placed in a position of honor, but never opened, never explored, never used for its true purpose. And then, almost without you realizing it, something inside you begins to change. You no longer want to just recite. You want to understand. You no longer want to just say. You want to truly connect. And at that very moment, you return to the first line. But this time, you don't rush. Our Father. You pause. You truly pause. Father. What does that word really mean? Not according to books, not according to habit, but in reality, in real life. You begin to realize this is not a formal way of addressing, not a ritual, not a religious term. This is a calling, a relationship, an identity, and what you are about to discover is not just the meaning of a prayer, but a completely new way to see God and to see yourself. And then, when you stay long enough on those two words, Our Father, you begin to realize that this is not just a way of addressing, but a declaration, not an opening line, but a foundation, because, throughout history, human beings have called the Creator by many names: Almighty, Most High, Judge, Holy One. Those titles are all true, but they always create a distance, a very great distance, between a small human being and a being beyond all understanding. A distance that makes you feel that you must be careful, must be proper, must stand far away, must be worthy before you dare come near. But here, everything changes, not gradually, but completely. Father, that is a word a child can say, without learning, without preparation, without needing to prove anything. Just existing is enough to call him. And that is what makes this line feel almost too bold. Because when you say Father, you are not just speaking about him. You are redefining your own position. You are no longer standing as a stranger, no longer as an outsider, no longer as someone trying to step into a place you don't belong. You are standing as a child. And if you truly stay there, if you don't rush ahead, if you don't read past it like you always have, you will begin to feel this is not as easy to accept as you thought. Because Father is not the same experience for everyone. Some people hear that word and feel warmth, but others feel only emptiness. Some remember protection, but others remember absence. Some feel loved, but others feel hurt. And so, when you say Father, you are not just saying a word. You are carrying your memories into it. You are projecting your personal experiences onto a sacred relationship. And this is exactly where many people get stuck, without even realizing it, because they think they lack faith or they are doing something wrong, when in reality, they are simply trying to understand something divine through very human limitations. But try to consider this from another angle. What if Father here is not an amplified version of an earthly father, but the source, the standard, the perfect image of which all other images are only incomplete reflections? What if you don't need to use your past experience to understand him, but instead you are invited to heal that very experience by discovering who he truly is? And right at this point, the prayer begins to come alive. It is no longer just words, but a doorway that leads you into a relationship that you did not create, but are invited to enter. Our Father, not my Father, but our Father. And once again, another layer of meaning opens up. You are not alone. You are not the only child. You are not the center of the story. You are standing within a family far larger than you can imagine, with people you may have never met, yet still call brothers and sisters, with people who are not like you, who do not think like you, who do not live like you, yet call the same name. And that is both beautiful and also difficult. Because if he is our Father, then you cannot choose to love only those who are easy to love. You cannot accept only those who are like you. You cannot say Father and at the same time reject his other children. And this is exactly where the prayer begins to change you, not through intense emotion, but through a simple truth that is not easy to live out. You are not just speaking to God. You are being placed back into a community, a body, a family, and family is not perfect. There will be misunderstandings. There will be wounds. There will be moments when you want to walk away, but it is still family. And when you say, Our Father, you are accepting that, not just with your words, but with the way you live. You begin to see that this prayer does not only reach upward, it also spreads outward. It does not only connect you to God, it binds you to people. And then the next part appears, who is in heaven? A very familiar phrase, yet one that is easily misunderstood. Because when people hear in heaven, they often think of distance, a place far away, a place unreachable, a place separated from reality. But if that is all you see, you will miss the most important thing. Heaven, here, is not just about location. It is about nature. Not to say he is far away, but to say he is above, unrestricted, unbound, unaffected by the things that frighten you every day. And this completely changes the way you pray. Because if he is Father, but limited, like everything in this world, then you will always worry, always doubt, always feel uncertain. But if he is Father, and he is in heaven, meaning above everything you are facing, then you begin to stand on a different foundation. Not emotion, but trust. Not control, but surrender. Not needing to understand everything, but knowing there is one who understands more than you. And here, something very deep happens. Two realities that seem opposite are placed side by side. Father, so close. In heaven, so high. One speaks of intimacy. The other speaks of majesty. One speaks of relationship. The other speaks of authority. And when both exist together, you begin to understand. This is not a normal relationship. You are not speaking to someone equal to you, but neither are you standing before a stranger. You are in a relationship that is both the closest and the greatest. And if you truly let that sink in, you will not be able to pray the same way again. No more rushing, no more mechanical repetition, no more just saying it to finish. Each word begins to carry weight. Each sentence begins to carry depth. And then you realize something unexpected. This prayer was not written for you to repeat. It was given for you to enter, not to memorize, but to live, not to rush through it, but to pause. And right here, you begin to slow down, not because you are forced to, but because you can no longer continue in a shallow way. Our Father in heaven is no longer just an opening line. It becomes something that reshapes your entire being. You know who you are, you know where you belong, and you know who you are speaking to. And when those three things become clear, the next part is no longer just a sentence, but a natural response, something that almost cannot not happen. Hallowed be your name. But before you continue, you pause again, not because you forgot, but because you begin to realize you cannot say this if you do not truly understand who he is. And in that moment, quiet, not dramatic, but deeply real, you step further into a journey, one you no longer want to return from. And when you begin to understand that he does not exist on the same plane as you, not limited by time, not bound by circumstances, not controlled by what you are going through, something very strange begins to happen. You no longer pray the same way. You no longer speak familiar words just because you have memorized them. You no longer repeat out of habit. You begin to pause because you realize you are speaking to someone you have never truly understood. And at that very point, a transformation begins, not on the outside, but on the inside. You begin to realize the next sentence is no longer simple. Hallowed be your name. At first, it sounds familiar, but if you pause long enough, you begin to see you have never truly understood it. Name is not just a label. In the Bible, name is essence. It is presence. It is who he truly is. Not something you call, but something you encounter. And be hallowed does not mean you make him holy. He is already holy before you existed, before this world existed. So what does this sentence really mean? It is not something you do for him. It is something that happens within you, that he is unlike anything you have ever known. He is not like humans, not like your thoughts, not like your imagination. He is completely different, completely set apart, completely holy. And when you begin to realize that you can no longer approach him casually, you no longer speak as if you are talking to an equal, you begin to revere, not fear as in terror, but a deep respect, a stillness inside, an awareness that you are standing before something far beyond yourself, and that changes everything. You no longer pray just to ask. You no longer speak just to be heard. You begin to listen. And when you begin to listen, you realize something you had never noticed before. The problem was never that he wasn't speaking. It was that you had never truly been silent long enough to hear. Hallowed be your name. At this point, is no longer just a sentence. It becomes a state, a way of seeing the world, a way of seeing yourself. You begin to see everything differently. The things you once thought were important begin to shrink. The things you once chased begin to lose their weight. Not because they were wrong, but because you have seen something greater. And when something greater appears, everything smaller naturally shifts its place. You don't have to force yourself to let go. You don't have to push yourself to change. The change happens naturally because you are no longer the same person. You are no longer someone who simply reacts to the world. You begin to live from a deeper awareness. And that is when prayer is no longer just words. It becomes the way you live. Hallowed be your name means this. Everything in your life begins to reflect that awareness. The way you speak, the way you think, the way you treat others. Not because you are trying to become better, but because you have seen something that makes it impossible for you to live the same way again. And that is the turning point. Not when you decide to change, but when you can no longer return to who you used to be. You begin to realize you are no longer praying to change your circumstances. You are being changed through the prayer, and this leads you into something even deeper. You are no longer the center. Before, every prayer revolved around you, your needs, your emotions, your desires, but now, the center has shifted. It is no longer you, it is him. Hallowed be your name is not just something you say. It is a complete reordering within you, a repositioning. He is at the center. You are in your rightful place, and when that happens, something very important begins to appear. Clarity. Not clarity about the future, not clarity about plans, but clarity about direction. You don't know everything, but you know you are moving in the right direction, and that is enough, because from here, you no longer need to control everything. You no longer need to understand it all. You begin to learn to trust, not trust in circumstances, but trust in the one you are turning toward. And as you begin to trust, a new door opens, a next sentence that you have read before, but never truly stepped into. Your kingdom come, and right here, everything begins to move again. No longer just awareness, but action. No longer only internal, but now flowing outward. Because when something truly changes within you, it cannot stay still. It must be expressed. It must be lived. And you begin to realize you are not just praying a prayer. You are stepping into a journey where you are no longer just an observer. You have become a part of it, and that is only the beginning. And as you begin to say, "Your kingdom come," you are no longer speaking an ordinary prayer. You are accepting something that very few people truly understand, because your kingdom is not a distant place in heaven. It is not a location you go to after you die. It is a reality that begins right here, within you, in the way you live, in the way you respond to the world. And when you say, "Your kingdom come," you are not just hoping for something to happen. You are allowing something to begin. A shift of authority, a shift of influence, a shift in how everything operates within you. Before, your life was driven by emotions, by fear, by pressure, by what others think, by what you want in the moment. But when your kingdom begins to appear, a new system is established. No longer reaction, but direction. No longer impulse, but guidance. No longer living by what you feel, but beginning to live by what you know is right, and that is not easy, because it goes against your old self. You still have emotions, you still have fear, you still have old habits, but now you are no longer controlled by them. You begin to have a pause, a very small space between what you want to do and what you actually do. And that space is where your kingdom begins to appear, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to change the direction of an entire life. You begin to realize you don't have to win over every emotion. You only need to not let them rule you. You don't have to be perfect. You just need to not go back to your old self. And step by step, something very strange begins to happen. You become more stable. Not because everything around you becomes easier, but because inside you, there is now a different foundation. A foundation not dependent on circumstances. A foundation not shaken by emotions. A foundation that comes from knowing who is leading your life. And that changes how you see everything. You no longer overreact to small things. You are no longer pulled by what is meaningless. You begin to distinguish what truly matters and what is only temporary. And when you see the world that way, you begin to live differently. Not because you are trying, but because you cannot live the same way anymore. Your kingdom come, at this point, is no longer a wish. It becomes a reality in motion, in every small decision, in every thought, in every reaction. And then you begin to understand something even deeper. If your kingdom truly comes within you, it will not stop with you. It must flow outward, not through loud words, not by trying to prove something, but through the way you live. Others will begin to notice. There is something different about you. Not that you are perfect, not that you no longer have problems, but you are no longer controlled by those things the way you used to be. You carry a peace that others don't understand. You carry a steadiness that they cannot explain, and that itself becomes a testimony. You don't need to say much. You don't need to try to impress anyone. Just live, and the kingdom within you will speak on its own. And then you begin to realize something very important. You are no longer living just for yourself. Every action you take, every choice you make, reaches beyond you, and that makes you more humble and at the same time more responsible. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" You begin to ask, "What is right?" And that is when the next line becomes alive. Your will be done, not in some distant world, but right here in your life. And when you arrive at that line, you will realize this journey is not just about changing the way you think. And when you say, "Your will be done," everything is no longer the same, because this line is no longer a gentle prayer. It is surrender, not surrender in weakness, but surrender in awareness. You begin to understand that your life no longer revolves around what you want, but around what is right, and that is where everything becomes heavier. No longer just emotions, no longer the initial excitement, no longer those moments of feeling touched. Now, it is reality, it is decisions, it is action, and you begin to realize something you have never truly faced before. Your will and his will are not always the same. There are things you want to hold on to. There are things you don't want to let go. There are paths you are used to. There are choices that make you feel safe. But deep inside, you know, there is another direction. A direction you did not choose, but cannot deny. And that is where the real battle begins. No longer between you and the world, but between two parts within you. One side says, hold on to it. It's safe. Don't change too much. Just a little is enough. The other side is not loud, but clear. No. Keep going. Let go. Trust. And the hardest part is not hearing that voice. It is following it. Because to follow it means you will lose something. People don't talk about this much, but anyone who truly walks this path will go through it. Loss. Not necessarily losing something material, but losing the old versions of yourself, old thoughts, old reactions, old habits, even old relationships. Not because you hate them, but because you can no longer live the old way. And that hurts, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, very deeply. You begin to feel like you no longer fully belong to where you once belonged. Old conversations no longer make you feel comfortable. Old ways of thinking no longer fit. You are not completely a new person, but you are no longer the old one either. You are in between, once again, between what was familiar and what is being formed. And this is the stage where many people turn back, not because they don't believe, but because they cannot tamel this feeling. The feeling of not belonging, the feeling of uncertainty, the feeling of losing yourself. But what they don't understand is they are not losing themselves. They are losing the version of themselves that was not real. And if you make it through this stage, something very different will happen. You begin to stabilize, not because things get easier, but because you have chosen. Truly chosen, not just with words, but with actions. You are no longer standing between two directions. You have stepped fully into one, and when that happens, your will be done is no longer a sentence. It becomes the way you live. You begin to make different decisions, not as quickly as before, but more deeply. You begin to respond differently, not from your first emotion, but from what you know is right. You begin to refuse things that you once would have accepted, not because you are better, but because you no longer want to go back. And this, not everyone will understand. Some will think you have changed too much. Some will not understand why you are not the same anymore. Some will say you are overdoing it. But deep inside, you know, this is not you trying to become someone else. This is you becoming who you were meant to be. And then, something very strange begins to happen. You no longer feel the need to prove anything. You no longer need others to fully understand you. You are no longer pulled by validation, because you now have a different kind of confirmation. Not from the outside, but from within. A certainty without words, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, a steadiness that is not shaken by opinions around you, and that is when your will be done is no longer a battle. It becomes a flow. You no longer force yourself to do what is right. You begin to naturally do what is right, not always perfectly, but always returning to the right direction. And in that state, you begin to understand something deeper. His will is not to take your life away, but to give back to you your real life. Not the version you created, not the version shaped by others, but the version that was there from the beginning. And when you live in that, you begin to see more clearly, not the whole path, but enough to keep moving. You no longer need to know everything that will happen. You only need to know what the next step is, and you go. Not loudly, not for show, but steadily, one step at a time, and then you realize something that makes you stop. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. You are no longer just living for yourself. You are carrying something greater. Not to show off, but to guard, not to control, but to be faithful. And that is when you begin to understand the true meaning of on earth as it is in heaven. Not a perfect world, but a person living rightly, right in the middle of an imperfect world. And that person becomes different. A place where truth exists, a place where light is not extinguished, not because they are strong, but because they chose not to go back. And when you look back on the whole journey, from the moment you first felt, to when you walked, to when you let go, to when you lived it, you begin to understand. This is not a moment. This is a process of transformation, slow, deep, irreversible, and you are in it. Not standing outside looking in, but inside. And now the question is no longer, do you understand? But will you continue? Because this path, what does not end here, it has only just begun to go deeper. And if you continue, you will step into something even greater, not just changing yourself, but impacting the world around you, not by your own strength, but by what you carry. And that is where this journey leads. Not to an ending, but to being sent. Not to hold on, but to be poured out. And you are getting very close to that moment. And as you move closer to that moment, you begin to feel something very different. No longer the flood of questions like before, no longer the constant inner Sangharsh. Instead, a deeper silence, but not the silence of emptiness, the silence of maturity. You no longer need to keep asking, am I on the right path? Should I keep going? Am I enough? Because those questions have slowly been replaced, not with clear answers, but with an inner conviction, a knowing without needing explanation. And that knowing begins to change the way you see the world. You no longer see things the same way. You no longer judge by appearances. You are no longer pulled by what is temporary. You begin to see deeper. You see behind actions, motives, behind words, states of being, behind chaos, people who are lost. And for the first time, you are no longer focused only on yourself. You begin to look outward. Not to judge, but to understand. Not to prove yourself right, but to live rightly. And that is the sign that you are no longer in the stage of being called. You are stepping into the stage of being sent. But the interesting thing is, there is no clear moment that marks it. No announcement, no special ceremony, no one officially confirms it. It happens naturally, quietly, like a seed growing underground. No one sees it, but it is still growing. And then one day, you realize you are no longer living just for yourself. You begin to speak, not just to express, but to uplift. You begin to act, not just for personal gain, but for what is right. You begin to show up in other people's lives, not to be noticed, but to make a difference, even if it is small, but real. And that is the moment you become part of something greater, not by title, not by position, but by influence. An influence that is not loud, not showy, but spreading little by little. You don't need to change the whole world. You only need to be faithful with your part. And the strange thing is, when you do that, everything begins to connect. What you have been through is no longer meaningless. The struggles you once carried are no longer burdens. The questions you once wrestled with are no longer obstacles. All of it becomes part of the story. Not for you to keep, but for you to use, to reach others, to guide others, to become evidence that this journey is real, and then you begin to see others. People who are exactly where you once were. They are feeling it too. They are confused too. They are standing between two worlds, and you realize you understand them, not through theory, but through experience. And that is when you are no longer just the one walking. You become someone who helps others walk, not by forcing, not by convincing, but by being present, by the way you live, by being yourself in your truest form, and that has more power than any words. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real. You don't need to know everything. Just be faithful to what you already know. And when you do that, something very deep happens. You begin to see meaning. Not some distant grand meaning, but meaning in each moment, in small conversations, in simple decisions, in choices no one sees. You begin to understand this journey is not meant to take you to an end point, but to transform the way you live each day. And that is exactly what many people miss. They think there is a destination, a moment when everything becomes perfect, a moment when they will finally be enough. But the truth is, there is no such ending. There is only continuous growth, only ongoing steps, only deeper layers of the same journey. And you are in that flow, not outside, not going back, but moving forward. And every step you take, no matter how small, has value. Not because it is big, but because it is right. And then you begin to understand one final thing, not with your mind, but through experience, that the initial calling was not the only beginning. It was just a doorway. The real journey is how you walk through that doorway every day, not once, but many times, in small choices, in unseen moments, in the times you could go back, but you don't. And that is where you truly become. Not in bright spotlight, but in quiet steps. Not in recognition, but in faithfulness. And when you look back, you will no longer ask, "Have I gone far?" You will know, "I am walking rightly," and that is enough. And if you have come this far, it is not by accident, not just to listen, but to realize that you are no longer outside this story. You are in it, living it, continuing it, with your own life. And the final question is not a big one, just something very simple. Today, will you keep walking, continue writing? And when you ask that question, today, will I keep walking? You begin to realize the answer no longer comes from feelings. It no longer depends on how you feel. It no longer depends on whether you feel motivated. Because if you wait for emotions, you will stop many times. If you wait for absolute clarity, you will never move. And if you wait until you become perfect, you will never begin. But this journey is not built on those things. It is built on something very different. A choice. A simple choice. But repeated every day. To step or not to step. And you begin to understand the greatest change in your life does not come from a dramatic moment. It comes from small decisions, repeated quietly, consistently. No one applauds, no one notices. But those very things are shaping who you are becoming. You are no longer searching for big signs, no longer needing a push to continue. Because you have seen enough, understood enough, gone far enough, that you cannot go back to who you were. And from that point, a new kind of strength begins to form, not the strength of emotion, but the strength of stability. You begin to stand more firmly, not because everything around you becomes easier, but because inside you becomes clearer. You know where you are going, not in detail, but in direction. And when you have direction, you are no longer lost in small things. The opinions around you no longer shake you like before. The difficulties that come no longer make you question the entire journey. You begin to see everything differently, not as obstacles, but as part of the process, not as signs you are wrong, but as signs that you are moving. And that is when you truly grow, not because you know more, but because you are steadier, steady in your choice, steady in your direction, steady even when no one understands. And that very steadiness creates influence, not through words, but through presence. Others begin to feel it, not because you try to show it, but because you have changed, naturally, genuinely. You don't need to say, I have changed. They will see it through how you respond, through how you decide, through how you live, and that is when your journey begins to touch others. Not because you try to help, but because you are living truthfully, and truth always spreads. You begin to become a place of stability, not perfect, but trustworthy, not strong all the time, but consistent, and in a world where everything is constantly changing, that becomes rare and very valuable. But at the same time, you also realize something. This journey will never become completely easy. There will always be days you are tired, days you doubt, days you want to stop. And that does not mean you are wrong. It simply means you are human. But the difference now is, you no longer stop there. You no longer let those moments define you. You move through them. You carry them with you, but you don't let them pull you back. And that is true freedom. Not the absence of difficulty, but not being controlled by it. Not the absence of fear, but not letting fear decide for you. You still feel, but you still move. And when you look back on the journey, from the very first moment, when you only felt something strange, until now, you will see something very clearly. You have changed, not suddenly, not perfectly, but truly and deeply. You are no longer the one standing outside, no longer the one just listening, just watching, just thinking. You are the one living it, day by day, step by step, and that cannot be taken away. No one can walk it for you, no one can live it for you, but no one can stop you from continuing, if you choose to continue. And that is the greatest power you have. Not controlling everything, but choosing to keep moving, no matter the circumstances, no matter how you feel, no matter what others think. You can still step forward, and when you do, the story continues to unfold. Not immediately, not in the way you expect, but it unfolds, little by little, as it always has, and then, one day, you will meet yourself again. Not the old version, but the version you once sensed long ago. The version you thought was distant, impossible to reach, but now it is no longer a goal. It is who you are becoming. And when that happens, you will no longer need to ask, should I keep going? Because you have become someone who keeps going. Not because you are forced to, but because that is who you are now. And the journey continues. There is no ending, only deeper, only more real, only closer to who you were created to be. And right now, as you are reading these words, maybe you don't need more information, no more reasons, no more proof. Maybe you only need one thing, to keep going, even if it's small, but real. And that is enough. Enough to continue, enough to change, enough to open the next part of your own story. The atmosphere thickens. There is no more wind, no more sound of the world, only the heavy presence of a decision. He kneels there, unmoving, head still lowered, but inside him is a storm. Memories begin to rise, not gently, but violently. He sees faces again, people he once touched, the blind man seeing light for the first time, the lame man standing for the first time, a child smiling for the first time when held. Every gaze, every smile, every word of gratitude. But then, everything begins to distort. Those faces are no longer the same. The eyes grow empty, the smiles turn into accusation. Gratitude becomes rejection, and he sees the very people who were once healed are now standing in the crowd. They did not look at him with love, they looked at him with coldness. And then a sound echoed, not loud, but it pierced straight through the heart. Crucify him. He did not lift his head, but his body trembled, not from fear of death, but because he knew. This was the cost of love, not an easy love, not a love that is returned, but a love that still chooses to stay when it is rejected. The wind began to blow again, but this time, colder. The darkness seemed to draw closer, covering the entire garden. He clenched his hands, the ground beneath them, damp, not only from the dew, but from sweat and pain. He lifted his head, for the first time. His eyes were no longer wavering. The pain was still there, the weight was still there, but something else had begun to appear. Acceptance, not surrender in weakness, but clarity, and still choosing to move forward. He looked up at the sky. There was no more light, only a deep, endless darkness, but he did not look away. He stared into it, as if looking at the unavoidable. A tear fell, but this time there was no trembling. He breathed in, slow, deep, and then he spoke, very softly but clearly. Your will be done. There was no thunder, no miracle, nothing changed in the outside world, but inside him, everything changed. The storm grew still. Fear no longer controlled him. The pain was still there, but it no longer made him step back. He slowly stood up. The movement, slow but firm. His head still lowered, but no longer collapsed. He took one step, then another, not rushed, not hesitant. In the distance, the light of torches began to appear. Shadows moved closer. Footsteps, the sound of metal clashing. The world was returning. And this time, he did not hide, he did not turn away. He walked toward them, not because he didn't know what would happen, but because he knew exactly, and still chose to go. Blood still on his forehead, his clothes still soaked, but his eyes, no longer the eyes of someone struggling, but the eyes of someone who has decided. When the soldiers stood before him, he did not step back, not a single step. One of them stepped forward, stopped, looked at him. There was something that made him hesitate. Not because he was stronger, but because he was not afraid, and that made others afraid. But then, his hands were seized, ropes tightened around his wrists, not gentle, not kind, but he did not resist. Not because he was weak, but because he had chosen. The imagined camera for your video would stop at his eyes. No more tears, no more trembling. Only one thing remained: peace in the middle of the storm. And that is the climax. Not when miracles happen, not when enemies are defeated, but in the moment when a person chooses to do what is right, even at the cost of everything. Real life, not the version you've pieced together from other people's expectations. Not the version built from fear, from pressure, from the need to prove you're okay, but the real version, where you don't have to pretend, don't have to force yourself, don't have to chase, and that doesn't come all at once. It comes little by little, like light that doesn't burst in suddenly, but slowly seeps into a dark room. At first, you're still confused. There are still days you want to go back to the old ways. There are still moments you ask yourself, am I going too far? But then, small moments begin to happen. You respond differently. In a situation where you used to lose control, you stay silent where you once would argue. You choose to forgive, even when you have every reason to hold on to anger. And then you realize you're not becoming weaker, you're becoming stronger in a different way. Not the strength to defeat others, but the strength to not be controlled by yourself. And that is the sign that your will be done is no longer something distant. It is happening within you, not loudly, not visibly, but real. And as you continue, another line appears. A line you may have once read quickly, almost without noticing. Give us this day our daily bread. It sounds simple, even ordinary. But if you pause, after everything you've just gone through, this line becomes completely different. Because after you've spoken about Father, about name, about kingdom, about will, now you return to a very human need. Bread, but not in the old way, no longer. What do I need? What do I want? But what do I truly need to live rightly today? And the word today begins to matter. Not tomorrow, not some distant future, just today. One day. A short span of time, a boundary, and that is not limiting you. It is freeing you. Because before, you were always thinking ahead, worrying about tomorrow, worrying about next week, worrying about things that haven't even happened. But now, you are brought back to the present, to what is actually in front of you, and you begin to realize you don't need everything all at once. You only need enough for today, enough to keep going, enough to not collapse, enough to stay faithful to what you've chosen. And bread is no longer just food. It is strength, it is patience, it is clarity, it is peace, it is everything you need to not go back to who you were. And when you ask for that, something very different happens. You stop demanding, you begin to trust, not trusting that you will have everything, but trusting that you will have enough. And enough is a concept you may have never accepted before. Because the world always says more, better, be greater than others. But in this journey, enough becomes the most powerful thing. Enough to not lose yourself. Enough to not trade away what matters. Enough to stay on your path. And when you live with enough, you become lighter. No longer pressured to control everything. No longer tense about a future that hasn't come. You learn to receive, not passively, but with gratitude. And that gratitude opens a deeper layer, because when you realize that you are receiving, you begin to look back at what you are still holding, the things you haven't let go, the things you haven't forgiven, and then the next line appears. Not light, not easy. Forgive us our debts, as we also forgive. And this time, you can't just skim over it anymore, because you understand. This line is no longer theory. It touches directly the things you are holding inside. Old wounds, unresolved words, memories you haven't truly let go of. And you realize forgiveness is not forgetting. It's not saying that what happened was okay. It is not allowing that thing to continue controlling you, not allowing the past to decide how you live today. And that is hard, very hard, because there are things that truly hurt you. There are people who truly wounded you, and a part of you doesn't want to let go, doesn't want to forgive, not because you are bad, but because you are afraid that if you let go, it will mean it didn't matter. But deep inside, you begin to understand. Forgiveness is not saying it didn't matter. It is saying that no longer has control over me. And when you begin to forgive, not all at once, but little by little, something very light happens. You no longer carry the same weight. You're no longer pulled backward, no longer trapped in old loops. You begin to feel freer, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer bound. And when you reach this point, you realize this prayer is not just words, it is a journey like that goes through you, changes you, separates you from who you were, and leads you to who you truly are. And you know you are not finished, but you are no longer at the beginning. You have gone far enough that you cannot go back to who you were. And that is what matters most. After all of that, there is no thunder, no explosion of miracles. There is only a strange stillness. Not the stillness of defeat, not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of a soul that has just laid down its heaviest burden. When a person says, "Your will be done," the first thing that changes is not the world. It is themselves. The burden doesn't disappear immediately. The circumstances are still there. The path is still difficult. But inside, something is different. Fear is still there, but it no longer controls them. Pain is still present, but it no longer suffocates them. The future is still unclear, but it no longer makes them panic, because now they are no longer walking alone. There is something very strange that happens when a person truly lets go. They don't become weaker, they become more grounded than ever. Not because things get easier, but because they no longer need to control everything. And in that very moment, peace begins to appear. Not the kind of peace that says everything is fine, but the kind that says, no matter what happens, I will stand. That is a kind of peace that doesn't come from circumstances, but from faith. A very simple, yet powerful faith. I don't need to understand everything. I just need to keep walking. And when people live like that, they begin to see things they never saw before. They see a small door opening in days that once felt hopeless. They see a person appear at the exact moment they were needed. They see an opportunity that they might have missed if they had tried to control everything. Not because miracles suddenly appear, but because they have changed the way they see. When you stop forcing life to go your way, you begin to realize life is still leading you, and sometimes it leads you to a place far better than anything you once asked for. Those who have truly let go are not the ones who lost everything. They are the ones who found what truly matters. Not fame, not control, not a perfect life, but a soul no longer torn apart by anxiety. A heart no longer pulled between fear and expectation. They begin to live more slowly, not because they are weak, but because they no longer need to run. They begin to listen more, not because they are lost, but because they trust they are being guided. And the most beautiful part is that they begin to become a light for others, not through preaching, not through theory, but through the way they live. A person who is no longer panicking makes others feel safe. A person who no longer tries to control makes others feel at ease. A person who has let go makes others wonder, maybe I can be like that too. And that is how change spreads. Not loudly, not forcefully, just a peaceful person appears. But understand this clearly. Letting go is not a one-time thing. There will be days when fear returns. There will be moments when you want to take control again. There will be times when you doubt everything, and that is completely normal. Transformation is not a moment. It is a journey. Each day you stand before a choice, hold on or let go. And every time you choose to let go, you become a little lighter, a little freer, a little closer to peace, until one day, you realize the thing that once scared you the most no longer has power. Not because it disappeared, but because you have changed. And that is the real miracle. Not changing the world, but changing how you stand in it. And then, one final question begins to appear. If I have let go, how will I live from now on? The one who is with you. The light is still there, but it is no longer blinding like before. It softens, warmer, closer, no longer a distant light from the sky, but as if it is right beside you. You are still standing there, but something has completely changed. You are no longer trembling, no longer confused, no longer trying to escape. You stand firm, for the first time in a very long time. You feel like you don't have to try to hold yourself together, because you know you are not alone. There is no voice speaking, no thunder, no dazzling miracle. Only a presence, quiet but clear. You take a step, slow but steady. Your feet no longer feel heavy, no longer pulled back by fear or old thoughts. You walk like someone who has been set free. The surroundings begin to become clearer. No longer thick darkness, no longer blurred images, but a path. A simple path, not glamorous, not easy, but clear. You look down at your hands, no longer shaking, no longer clenched. You open them, and you realize you are no longer holding the things that once hurt you. The memories, the mistakes, the shame, the things you once thought were unforgivable. They haven't disappeared, but they no longer control you. You take a breath, not to force strength, but because you can. A gentle breeze passes by, not cold, not frightening, but warm, like a very soft touch. You turn back, looking behind you, the place you just came from. You see darkness, but it is no longer scary. It no longer consumes you. It no longer calls you back. It just exists, and you have stepped out of it. You don't need to go back. You don't need to prove anything to the past. You don't need to fix everything all at once. You only need to keep walking. You take another step and another. Each step, not big, not loud, but real. You begin to realize something. You are not called to be perfect. You are called to walk. And you are walking. The light is no longer only ahead of you. It walks with you wherever you go. Even if the path becomes dark again, you know you will not return to who you were. Not because you are stronger, but because you are no longer alone. A quiet moment. You stop, not because you are tired, but to realize how far you have come. No one applauds, no one sees, no one praises, but that no longer matters, because you know you have truly changed, not on the outside, but from within. You no longer need to prove to the world that you are okay. You truly are. Not because things are easier, but because you are no longer afraid to face them. Once again, a soft light falls on your face. Not to make you stand out, but to show you're alive, truly alive. You look up, no longer searching for answers, no longer needing signs, no longer needing miracles, because you have already received the greatest thing, presence. You whisper without sound, but clear within your heart. I am here. Not a plea, not desperation, but a declaration. You are here. You are alive. You are moving forward. And you know, no matter what tomorrow brings, even if there are moments you feel weak again, doubt again, feel tired again, you will return to this path. Not because you will never get lost again, but because You know the way back. You keep walking. The camera slowly pulls away. You grow smaller on the long road ahead, but the light does not leave you. It walks with you, always. The screen slowly fades to black. A pause. Then a line appears slowly. You are not alone. A pause. A second line. You have never been alone. Silence. A small light appears in the middle of the black screen, then fades out.